Okay, so I'm going to be introducing to you the next assignment, the third kind of theme or lesson, which is negative and positive space. Okay, you have been looking and staring at these things, if you know what they are, or if you don't know what they are. But negative and positive space, I have a PowerPoint presentation for you, which you should look at, and then all the assignment sheets, and including both the large actual project for this unit and also the homework assignment for negative and positive space are all on there. Okay, but negative and positive space, what is it? So there are two types of space that exist within art. So that's positive space and negative space. Positive space, you can also say positive shape or positive space, negative shape or negative space, is the actual objects or spaces that the objects within an artwork, okay, that the objects take up. So let's say we have the marker here. This itself would be the positive shape. The negative shape or negative space is all the space surrounding the object. Okay, so if you were to draw a Crayola marker smack in the middle of an 18 by 24 like this, okay, I'll give you an example. Alright, pretend this is my paper. So you're only drawing the shape of the I'll just show this. Okay, so you're only drawing the shape, the outline of the object, right? This is the space that the object takes up. That is called the positive space or the positive shape. All this, the space or shape surrounding the positive shape or space is called the negative space or negative shape. Another word for positive shape or space is figure. Another word for negative shape or negative space is ground. This is so important that we cover this and we study this, because in the end, negative space is just as important as positive space. The space surrounding the object is just as important as the object itself. The relationship between negative and positive space or shape is called figure-ground relationship. And I think I've been emphasizing this in the first two assignments, right? How can you make this whole, your drawing surface, your picture plane, your composition, how can you make it all unified? Each area is just as important in unifying whatever the major component of the composition is, right? Like, let's say you're drawing hands, right? Maybe, unless your study is to just draw the hands, right? It's always important to consider the size, the scale, and the space surrounding your hands that you're drawing, okay? For most still lifes, I don't want like a tiny still life in the middle of your paper. I want you to find ways to incorporate this whole space, make it just as important and harmonious and needed as the major component of the drawing, or whatever it is that you're putting smack in the middle, okay? So that's that, negative and positive space. So let's say, scissors are always a good example. Let's say you'd be using a stapler. Let's say you put a stapler here, you get a bottle of spray paint, you go and you go okay? And then you take the stapler out, whatever area of the paper that the spray paint didn't spray would be the positive shape, which is kind of the outline. So it wouldn't include any of the lines in the stapler. It would just be the form, the outline form of the stapler. Now the area that was sprayed with the spray paint would be the negative space, right? Okay, so just a few things. I'm going to draw this stapler a negative drawing positive, negative drawing of this stapler, okay? I'm just going to be using marker, right? And so you're only going to be drawing right? So there's my stapler. So this is my positive shape or space. And then all of this space around it. I'm not going to shade all of this, but would be my negative space. Now, if you look at this drawing, right, there's a lot of negative space, right? Just a little bit of positive space. Now, depending on your composition and how you crop, and right now it's just one object, right? But when I say that negative space is just as important as positive space, we want to be finding relationships when we're drawing still life, of how to connect and intertwine the negative space and positive space, okay? One way to do it is by cropping. How do you make this more interesting? The relationship between negative and positive more interesting, right? Now, if you crop it like this versus like this, already the negative space becomes so much more interesting. You think of it as a shape. Look at this. Already it becomes so much more interesting, right? But there's still a lot more negative space, right? And the positive space is still kind of like smack in the middle, right? I mean, things look good. It feels stable when things are in the middle, right? There's stability, there's a sense of symmetry. But I would encourage you this semester to play around with where you place objects in a composition. And try to experiment from just putting things smack in the middle, okay? Now let's try cropping it in a different way. What if you were to crop it like this? And so now ignore all this, right? The negative space, let's talk about the negative space here. Now the negative space, so this is, the blank space is still the positive. Negative space looks like an E, right? So as you're doing these assignments and you're moving on to the final, think of ways of kind of describing the negative space. Like, get used to observing the negative space as much as the positive space, okay? It looks like an E, right? And then the positive, like there's still more negative space than the positive space, right? Or shape. But now the negative space or the negative shape becomes more interesting. It looks like an E. Maybe that's not that interesting, but you know what I mean. Okay, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Let's say you're working on a very complex still life, right? This isn't that complex, right? Or like the still lifes that I've shown you that you had to do for your contour still life drawings. When we look at a still life, usually we just focus on, oh, it's a cone, oh, it's a cube, balls and another little cube. But when we're drawing this on a paper where both negative and positive space exist and are just as important, you start noticing the spaces between the objects, which are also very interesting. So that's what I want to emphasize, right? This is a painting, but when we're looking at negative space, this space is surrounding the objects around the ball. We want to make them just as interesting as the objects or positive space or shapes themselves. Okay?